Stephen Baker was a senior technology correspondent for BusinessWeek and the recent author of Final Jeopardy on the IBM Watson Jeopardy challenge, as well as The Numerati, where Baker tells the story of the rapidly growing role of big data in the United States and across the world. So Mr. Baker, thank you so much for sitting down with Brown Political Review.
My pleasure.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you is about the recent developments in the NSA case. There's been sort of a defense by some to say that, well, you know, the data that we give to Google and the data that we give to companies, well, that's voluntary. But what the NSA is doing is taking our data involuntarily, and I wondered if you thought that that dichotomy had some merit.
Well, I think there's a big difference between what we give to Google and how Google uses that information. They basically want to make money from us, and they want to understand us so that they can sell us things and can give us what relevant advertising that we'll click on. And we understand that, and Google is a free service, and many of these other services are free, and we give them their data, and they give us a marvelous free service, and unimaginable. It would have been unimaginable 20 or 30 years ago. This is what we get from these companies. And they can't really punish us too much. Now, the NSA, if they find some kind of correlations between us, and they analyze our social networks, so they analyze the content of our communications and come up with perhaps a 48% probability that we are up to no good, that we are a member of some cell, then they can destroy our lives based on that probability. And, you know, as we see in Guantanamo now, there's real questions about habeas corpus and presumption of innocence and all of these things that are sort of the bedrock of the American legal system. And so if you have a government that can look at evidence, find people probably guilty, and take action based on that, then we've got a real problem. But it doesn't really have to do with the data. It has to do with how the government works.
I see. So that seems to be sort of a standard retort from the NSA, that this isn't really data, it's just metadata. Is there validity to that, or is that sort of the government covering its own hide?
No, there isn't really much validity to that. They're looking at metadata because they don't have the resources right now to dig deep into the enormous mountain of data that we all produce. And so the best way that they can glean over that data and process it as well as they can and try to look for patterns that mean something to them is to look at the metadata. But once they look at that, then they can start to look for areas of interest, certain correlations that pop out for them. And at that point, they don't hesitate, I'm sure, to dig deeper into the data and actually listen to phone calls and do things that don't have anything to do with data mining at all, but just have to do with basically snooping.
I guess maybe a better question would be, how do you see sort of the paradigm of what's on limits and what's off limits sort of emerging for the government in terms of our civic relationship to
Well, I think what we have to, you know, the data mining is going to exist, and the information that we produce is going to be analyzed at some level. What I would hope is that we would understand more or less how it's going to be analyzed, and that there would be some sort of ground rules so that we know what we're getting into. Right now, everything is sort of undefined, and you have this big boogeyman, which is terrorism, rising up above us all, and we have to understand what they can do, what they can't do, and what kind of oversight there's going to be over these operations. And right now, we don't understand it very well.
Do you think that there's a cultural definition there? I mean, is sort of the way to thread the needle to hope that Americans sort of learn to more or less accept the threat? I mean, that's obviously anathema if you're a politician, but it seems like maybe we might be headed in that direction.
I think what we have to do as a society, and I hoped that the Numerati would help in this discussion, is to understand, kind of analyze what secrets are important to us. You know, there are things that you tell your friends or that you put on social networks that your grandmother would never, ever do. There was a point 15 years ago, let's say, when business travelers would check into a motel or a hotel and spend 15 bucks for porno, right? I mean, that was hotels were the biggest purveyors of pornography in the country. And people decided that they were willing to tell the hotel, I'm interested in this porno movie. That's a huge, admission that you're making to the hotel. It's a huge privacy issue, but people are willing to do it. Now they go in with their laptops and they get on the hotel's Wi-Fi system, and instead of using the hotel's TV, they use porno on their laptops, right? And so they're telling the hotel what websites they're going to and all the rest. And the hotel belongs to a big multinational group that has interests in understanding them. And so people do this voluntarily, and yet at the same time, they worry that some of them worry that the government's figuring out too much about them. So I think we have to kind of understand which secrets we're sacrificing here, and kind of come to grips with that.
How do you see these programs winding down?
I don't see data mining winding down at all.
From the government's perspective? No,
I see data mining growing. I mean, I have a novel coming out next year, Ben, it's a dystopian novel about, it takes place in the future, and the government basically has our heads wired.
With that positive note, Steve Baker, tech writer and big data expert, and author of the Numerati, thank you so much for speaking with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks.